Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. And of course, now and always, keep hustling. With my guest, David Carothers. David, thank you for being here, and thank you for being the tremendous friend and mentor that you are.
It's my pleasure, man.
I can't tell you how honored I am that you're here and that you're going to share some of your story. I know a lot of your story. I assume our listeners don't know most of it, and a lot of the things that I don't know that I know I will learn today, I know will certainly inspire my hustle. If for nothing else, knowing that I get to know someone who's been through a lot and see your success and your family and your friendship circle and those who call you a mentor and a true friend. So thank you for being here again.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
So let's hop right into it. Here we're all about inspiring the hustle and everyone learning from each other in how to continue their hustle. So what do we need to know about the upbringing of David Carothers that led him to be the beast of not only an insurance agent, but a influencer, marketing guru, business leader, and everything that he is today?
Yeah, it's interesting as an adult to sit back and look at what life looks like. And with me having turned 50 this year, you begin to reflect a lot more than you project. Not that I stopped projecting what I'm going to do or having goals or whatever, but let's call it what it is, man. 50, I've guaranteed to have lived at least 50% of my life. If I live to be 100, the chances of the last 10, 20 years of that being any quality are probably not, that good. And so you don't think about what you're going to do as much as you think about what you've done or what you haven't done. And then that helps you to adjust what things look like moving forward. And so I have spent a ton of time just sitting back and reflecting over the course. Really, it started about 3 or 4 years ago, but it has been considerable in the last year. I was born outside of Cleveland, Ohio, right on Lake Erie in Lorain at St. Joseph's Hospital. And my extended family still all lives up in Lorain, Amherst, and Elyria, right on Lake Erie in Ohio. My dad was a state trooper at the time. And I'm going back this far because it sets a foundation, and you're going to see exactly how I got to where I am today. My dad was an Ohio State trooper. He got transferred. We moved down to the Columbus area where he was put into headquarters, and my brother and sister, who were twins, were born. And my mom said, no more state trooper. Now you have 3 kids. And I'm thinking, well, it was okay if he had one, that he was putting his life at risk every night. But now these 2 come in, and it means something, huh? But he ends up leaving the state trooper role, and he took a job at U.S. Steel back where in the area where we came from as an accident investigator, because that's something that you see. I mean, we saw that when I was in retail. A lot of ex-law enforcement and fire people, firemen come in and they're safety consultants, and they do inspections and things like that, as risk managers for the organization. So he started out as a accident investigator. And we did the U.S. Steel circuit. This is before everything blew up with domestic steel production. So we went from Cleveland to Pittsburgh to Birmingham, Alabama, and then ended up in Tampa, Florida, when he took a job as a corporate director of safety for Florida Steel. And we were here from the time I was in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and then part of the way through the 11th grade year, like right in the first quarter, we ended up moving, just he and I moved up to Parkersburg, West Virginia, so that I could get there in time to play basketball. And then the rest of our family joined us at the break at Christmas time, and we had relocated there. We were there for a year and or a year and a half. And then right after I graduated, my parents moved back to the same house we lived in. And I'm thinking, man, 11th, what a crappy time to have to relocate. You're in 11th grade, you're going to go for your last year and a half to a school where you know nobody. And that was kind of my MO, man. I mean, we moved every 2 to 3 years my entire childhood just because dad was moving up the food chain in corporate America. And, ultimately, they ended up bouncing from Tampa up to Birmingham, Alabama, to High Point, North Carolina, back to Birmingham, Alabama, and back to Tampa. When I got out of the house, I lived in Birmingham for 10 years, and I've been back in Tampa since 2004. I'm not going anywhere at this point. So I look at it because society was different back then. It wasn't where you had social, you didn't have, we had what we called neighborhood justice, right? Like if somebody made you mad, you fought, you squashed it, and you were back playing either later that day or the next day. I was always the new kid. I was always getting picked on. I was always getting bullied. I started school early. I was young for my age, for my grade. And so I was always a little bit more immature than everybody else. And I struggled with that. And I think the other thing that's notable is I wasn't diagnosed with having ADHD until I was an adult in my 40s. So once I got that diagnosis, a lot of the stuff that happened in my childhood made a whole lot more sense. But as I look back thinking through that section of my life, as much as it sucked at that point, I didn't have a choice, man. You're an 8-year-old kid. You can't tell your parents, nope, I'm not moving with you. I'm just going to go ahead and stay here. I was forced into that environment. I was forced to be the new kid. I was forced to be uncomfortable. I was forced to figure out a way to how to get through. And as I look now, I can walk in any room, anywhere, and have zero fear whatsoever of talking to a complete stranger about any number of things because I was conditioned in my childhood to do that.
Isn't it amazing how at the time it's impossible to know that, but now when you look back, you're like wow, that 11th grade year was changed. I wouldn't have gotten this professionally or personally if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, it was a culture shock, man. When you move from Tampa to West Virginia, it's like going back 10 years in a time capsule. And the demographic is completely different. How people live their lives is completely different. I love West Virginia. It's a beautiful state, but it's behind, in a lot of ways, and it's completely different than where I came from.
It's also interesting that you bring up that the places that you were very different. It wasn't like you went from a corporate perspective from New York to London to Chicago to LA. Right. You touch those different places, which obviously now looking back at it, all those different, it's not quite cultural things, but those uniquely,
I would say cultural is probably pretty accurate, man, to be honest with you. Think about this. I moved to Birmingham, Alabama in 1983, and I'm called a Yankee the entire time I lived there. They're still fighting the Civil War. There was still some level of segregation, even though it wasn't, an official thing. It was an unofficial thing. I had to learn how to deal with that. And that's not something you process very well. I'm trying to figure out, why in the world are you holding it against me that I was born in Ohio just because I happened to move here? And I mean, I don't ever try and put myself out there as being persecuted in any way, shape, or form, but I do have some general understanding of what it may feel like just a little bit, because here I am going in, I might be the nicest guy in the world. These people want nothing to do with me because I was born north of the Mason-Dixon line. Or because you weren't in the crew to begin with, and now you're trying to fit in somehow. So yeah, and then I moved to Tampa, and it's like, hey, what's with the Southern accent, hillbilly? It's like, come on, man, I can't win. Now I'm the Southern guy. Then I go to West Virginia, and in my first day of school, my first class, there were 8 pregnant girls in the class. I don't know what it's like where you went to school, but where I went to school, if you got pregnant in high school, you disappeared. Exactly. You didn't come back. And I'll never forget this, man. There was a young lady that was shuffling across the front of the classroom with her hand at the small of her back. You could tell she was I was wondering if her water was going to break before she got to the pencil sharpener. And she went over, she sharpens her pencil, she goes back to her desk, and like 3 days later, she's not there. 6 weeks later, she comes back and she had the baby. She took her time and she's back in school. It's just things you don't think of. There was a dude in my graduating class that was 24 years old and had a wife and 2 kids. Like, that's just stuff you hear it and you think people are making fun of it. But the reality is that actually happens. Now, that being said, I also learned how to relate to those people. I learned how to relate to the people in the South. I learned how to relate to the people in the North. I learned how to relate to people who have money. I learned how to relate to people who don't have money. And it makes it much easier for you to, be able to navigate the social waters you have to navigate at that point. But if you continue the story, if I would not have gone to West Virginia, I never would have played baseball in high school, because down in Tampa, far more competitive, far more political. Up there, they're like looking for people to play. So I walked into a situation that allowed me to then further my career into college, where I, started making moves at that point. So when I ended up leaving all of that and relocated to Birmingham and was in retail, running grocery stores, and then ultimately Super Target stores, all of this happens before I'm 30. So I'm 30 years old sitting here thinking to myself, what do I want to be when I grow up? Grayson was 2 years old at the time, and he really didn't know who I was, because I was working 100 hours a week. I never had weekends off. I never had the fourth quarter off, because that's when you're doing everything for holiday shopping and everything else. And so, I had to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. Well, based on how my dad's career path went, he was back in Tampa at that point, and they're still here. And he was the senior VP of risk management and HR for a PEO based here in Tampa. And that PEO was founded by two guys who had a very successful independent agency that they sold for a lot of money. And they were basically sitting out their non-compete until they could go back and open another agency and try and do it even better than they did the last time. And so I called my dad and I said, hey, Dad, what do I want to be when I grow up? And he said, well, I've always thought that you would be a really good commercial insurance producer. I've been buying insurance from these guys for years, and I see the clowns that come in and call on me. And I know that, you have to be as smart or smarter. And I can promise that you work harder than they do. So I think it would be really good if you explored an opportunity in commercial insurance. I'm like, great. You recommend I do that here in Birmingham? Or he said, well, I want to introduce you to Lowry Baldwin, who was the co-chairman there of the PEO at the time. And he gave me the backstory. And so I took a lunch meeting and I flew on Southwest for a lunch meeting. I flew on Southwest, kind of like your deal, from New York to Miami that day.
That's it.
But
hustling.
I flew from Birmingham to Tampa, and I had lunch with Lowry for about an hour and a half at the original Outback Steakhouse on Henderson Boulevard in Tampa. And he said, David, he goes, I'm going to tell you something. He said, and this is after we had talked for a little while. He goes, the insurance industry is full of average people. It's a C industry. If you think you're above average, you are going to run circles around the people who are in the industry. And he goes, let me be clear. It's not that they're bad people, but you can make a lot of money not having to do a lot. And he goes, there's a lot of people that just get satisfied. They don't want to hustle. They don't want to embrace the grind. They're going to make enough to get by in a comfortable living, and that's it. And he goes, and if you're in for work-life balance, you can't get into a better industry. And he said, the other thing that I'm going to tell you is I'm getting ready to reopen. And when I do, I'm going to give you the opportunity to be very, very successful. He said, everybody has $100 to spend on insurance. It's in $20 bills. There's 5 20s. You have personal lines, you have commercial, you have employee benefits, you have life and health, or life rather, and you have retirement. He goes, those are the things that you can sell. And he goes, I'm going to set my shop up so that you have the ability to go out and get as many of those 20s as you can get, because we're going to do all of those things. I'm like, sounds good to me. So I went back to Birmingham and I packed everything up into my F-150, and I ended up moving down, and I started working in the insurance industry at that point. And so I was a student of the game. I didn't want, it wasn't from a call reluctant standpoint or anything like that, but I just wanted to know what it was I was doing. I had zero experience. So I got my license, immediately went out and got my CIC designation, and right after that got my CRM, so that I had some level of comfort if I were asked questions around insurance and risk management. I could have a half a chance of explaining it.
And of course, because since you never do anything extra in your life ever, that would just be that, of course, you would just do that right away.
Yeah, right away.
Right.
Yeah, right away.
Sure.
And hey, look, man, you want to talk about hustling? That wasn't online. It used to be that it would take somebody 5 years to get their CIC because they would only offer them in certain geographies at certain times for each module. I literally drove all over the Southeast. I started mine in July and I had it by December in the same year. So I did it in like 5 months to make sure that I had the knowledge. And so I was there for a couple of years. I had some success. I was the top producer while I was there, but I have a fundamental belief specific to our industry. It probably applies to most, but I feel like if you're a producer, you're not looking for a job. Like if you're a real producer, you're not looking for a job. And I'm going to clarify that. I'm not saying everybody that's out looking for a job as a producer is a hack, but what I'm going to say is the absolute best producers are going to get golden handcuffs at what agency they're at. They're going to tie them down somewhere. There's no way they're leaving. It's too expensive for them to leave. And the ones that are entrepreneurial are never going to work for anybody else. They're just going to go start their own agency. And so we were at a point where I had developed my sales process. I had my feet under me. I knew what I was doing. And I decided, that we were going to go and we launched another agency. And that was with my dad and another partner. And I did that for about 8 years. And I know you have another question, and we're getting ready to bleed right into that question. So if you want to ask it, then we can go from there. But that's how I got to the insurance industry and where I'm at today.
Sure. So first of all, that's an incredible story. I love the fact that you flew for lunch. Love the hustle there. Love the fact you just pack things up and then just hit the ground running in any industry, whatever industry anyone's in. You gotta. One thing that I've learned about the hustle from speaking to business leaders or in my own experience, and certainly from people like you, is if you don't jump into the deep end and you're not committed to it, then you'll never see success. You'll just be spinning the hamster wheel and never jumping to that. But as you alluded to, so there's a lot of things there. Early career, mid-career. You mentioned that you think you might be in the back nine, although I don't think you are. The most pivotal moment in your career when take us to that movie theater.
Well, I've driven you right down the driveway and we're in the parking lot getting ready to walk in the front door. So I was going through a divorce at the time. I don't talk about it a lot. I'm not proud of it. I wasn't raised to get divorced. I was raised to stay married for life and to find the right person. And unfortunately, that just didn't happen for a variety of reasons. And when we launched the agency, we were at a point where I had to not be officially a partner of the agency for divorce reasons, meaning my dad didn't want my equity on paper because he didn't want to become business partners with my soon-to-be ex-wife, which means we did the deal on a handshake, which by all practical purposes means that should be trusted. And, when you're dealing with your own father, then you tend to be even more trusting. Well, let's just say that you always need to get everything in writing, regardless of who you're dealing with, because that's the moment that allowed me to spend 8 years treading water in the prime of my adult life, from my mid-30s to my mid-40s, until I'd finally had enough and realized that the promise that was made to me when I was given my offer of employment was never going to be fulfilled. And I left and I launched Florida Risk.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that. Can you take us?
It's a far bloodier story than what I just gave you. I gave you the PG version.
The listeners thank you, and as does SEO. Can you take us to that moment where you decide? Obviously, there's some downside risk. Obviously, you mentioned that you had put a bunch of time and sales and probably accounts into this agency, and now you've decided that for whatever the bloody details are, you're gonna do it. You're gonna go out and you're gonna start your own agency. What was that thought process like? What were the fears? What was the energy?
So I'm gonna back up for 1 second, because I think that this is something that's important for anybody to hear. If you have somebody who's entrepreneurial in your organization, you have two choices. You can embrace the entrepreneurialism and empower them to make decisions and do things, or you need to go ahead and get rid of them, because that entrepreneurial spirit is not going to leave. When you're curious, when you want to build things, and when you get your rewards from building, whether it be processes, products, whatever, and true joy comes from helping others and see what you've done actually succeed, that's where you're going to spend your time. So it is 100% true that, in any situation, it's never just one party's fault. As things progressed in that agency and it became more and more evident, I actually had entrepreneurial, things that I was doing on the side. My wife and I had built a pretty good sized business that was an e-commerce platform that nobody in the insurance industry knows about because I never talk about it. But we had built this e-commerce platform, and so I could see I was getting the fulfillment there that was lacking. And my dad was getting more and more irritated with me because I was spending time doing that instead of spending time in the agency, when in the reality is, if I would have just had the ownership and the ability to do stuff in the agency, I'd have never had the other thing. So
right, you were scratching that itch of the entrepreneurial spirit,
so
having nothing to do with e-commerce.
Know your people and be able to give them what they need to be successful, right? And sometimes that's just freedom and the ability to think and explore new ideas and different ways to do things. But again,
sorry to interject. What I do want to say about that is, and the amazing thing about that for the business owners and managers and employers who do that, very often those employees actually grow their business the most because they're taking that entrepreneurial spirit, and the owner is reaping the benefits of that because they're giving them the platform. And if they don't have any reason to look elsewhere, that entrepreneurial spirit and that new way of thinking or new way of doing things manifests itself in the business that they're working in. So therefore, that owner actually sees the benefits financially also, not just having a more motivated employee.
Correct. But what they lose is they lose some level of control over that person because they
100%.
have to give them the freedom to explore it. And what I take from all of that is I wouldn't have any of the stuff that I have today or understand the digital and social game if I didn't have that e-commerce platform. 100% of what I do in Killing Commercial or with the podcast or any of that stuff, that's nothing new to me. That's just new to me in insurance. I've already built that in another segment of the economy, and I just transferred that skill set over here. So I had to scratch the entrepreneurial itch, and that's what gave me the skill set to then take what I really love doing, which is being an entrepreneur, bring it back into the industry that I actually loved, and now I have it for myself. The problem is the other group's the one who lost out. They had it. They had the ability to have this the whole time, and because they were more worried about control instead of collaboration, they got stuck without me being there. And you know what? Maybe that worked out great for them and great for me. I really don't care because we don't talk about it. That's not the Thanksgiving dinner conversation that we have, right? So all of that to say, I had to scratch that itch. But it's really important to understand that men and women are wired differently. I know, shocker, right? But when all of this was going down, we were in the dining room, or what's supposed to be the dining room of our home, and Andrea works from home. So her desk and phone setup and everything is on the left up against the wall. Mine's on the right against the wall. And I'm sitting there, and I had made my decision I was leaving, but I was also leaving the industry. Okay. I was done. I was done with insurance. I was so pissed off that I was not going to do anything in insurance anymore. I was going to do the exact opposite. And I had job offers to go into marketing from 3 Fortune 500 companies that have strong presence in the Tampa, Southwest Florida area. And we were sitting there. I'll never forget this, obviously, but we're sitting there and I'm trying to figure out which one of the 3 offers I'm going to take. I'm leaving the industry. Where am I going to go? And my wife, who is born and raised in New Jersey, and
that's right, Northeast, here we go,
represents that demographic very well, as you would expect her to. You can go with every generalization of a Jersey girl you want. She fits it, and she just looked at me and she's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing, man?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she did not say it that way, by the way. But I said, what do you mean? She goes, "Why are you screwing around with these offers that you have?" And I said, "Well, because they're good, because they're financially stable, because I want to make sure I don't put my family in a bad position, because I want to make sure I'm the breadwinner of the house." She goes, "All right, well, what you're telling me is you're doing this but you're not going to be happy. She said, you're not, she goes, look, and this is verbatim. She said, I have listened to you bitch for 8 years about all the things you would do if you could just make some decisions. Why don't you just open up your own agency, do all the things you've been complaining about, and it should all work out fine. I've got a good job. You don't have to worry about whether or not we're going to have enough money to get by or anything else. Plus, we had the side hustle that was doing really well at that time. So that was really some of the seed, if not all the seed money for Florida Risk. But I said, honey, to be honest with you, I want to be the breadwinner. I don't want to put you at risk. She said, I will support you 100% no matter what. And within 10 minutes, my FEIN was in my hands. My corporation was filed with the state of Florida. I had joined FAIA and I started to apply for my errors and omissions insurance. And I was off to the races, building my website because I know how to do that stuff, and all of those things. And that was it, man. That was the moment. And the moral of that story is this, and this is really, really important to me. And I think it's really important to a lot of professionals, regardless. If you don't have the support at home, if you don't have those people pulling for you, you're never going to reach your potential, period. And so when I made the decision that I was gone, I was in Key West, Florida with my wife on a cruise. And I found out that I was no longer eligible to participate in the company 401k program. Because as a direct line descendant of an owner of the organization, I was considered highly compensated. So at 42 years old, I'm standing on the streets realizing I have no retirement ability, no ability to save for retirement. I have no equity, which would have been my fallback position. And essentially, I'm standing here, and every day that I live in this situation puts me and my family further behind. And that's when I made the decision I was leaving, not necessarily going into the insurance industry. But the reason I tell that story is because that's exactly why Producers in Paradise is in Key West every single year. And it's exactly why I require the significant others of everybody who attends as an agent to be with them. Because my job as the leader of the community is to build the support structure in the community and in their homes. And I know that if I can bring the spouses or, significant other, whatever the politically correct thing to say is, if I can bring them together and have them build relationships with each other, it's going to make the job of the producers and the agency principals so much better. Some of Andrea's best friends are agency owners and producers' wives that she never would have known if we wouldn't have gone down this road. But it's magical for me to see somebody who's really not, I wouldn't say struggling, but they're trying to find their way. They're looking for their people. They're looking for how they're going to push to the next level, and they can come hang with us for that weekend down there, and their spouse makes friends, and they do things socially, and they make relationships in one weekend that last the rest of their life. And it's awesome just to watch what happens, because it's like somebody flips a switch. We get back, and it's like going to church camp, right? They come back and they're ready to go out and save the world at that point. And to me, there's no greater feeling for me in the world than that. I've made as much money as I can make, right? I can continue to go out and make money. It doesn't matter. Money is not where I find my joy. Money makes life fun. It makes it easy to take nice trips and have nice things. But the reality of the matter is, the true sense of purpose that I have is helping other people. And early in my life, I actually thought I wanted to be a pastor. To be honest with you, I was going to go to seminary. I was going to be a pastor. I was going to get up in front of people and talk. I was going to, have influence over them, however you want to put it. And I feel like I do have the skill set to do that today. I've just taken it in a different direction.
Well, I'm now going to call you the pastor of insurance, but first of all, I knew
Charles
that
Specht.
I knew that I was a fan of your wife's before this, but I think you're right in any relationship that support, it's completely unquantifiable, but I see it all the time, and you even see it when people get out of a bad relationship that having no support, quote unquote, at home is better than having that negative. But her faith in you is incredible. The fact that she knew, I have to believe that when she said that to you, you were like, you're right. Like, I don't really actually want to take one of these jobs. I really want to be in the insurance business and knock this out of the park and do everything that I've been saying. It was kind of like just somewhere sitting in the background. And when she yanked that out, I think for all of us in the industry, she didn't know what she was letting loose. But for her to say that, understanding that at the time that wasn't necessarily what you wanted to hear, but yet without that, you wouldn't be where you are today, right? Meaning what you thought you wanted to hear was, yeah, forget the insurance industry. You'll be great in any industry, or you can do great elsewhere. And meanwhile, 5 minutes later, you're as deep into the industry that you said you would never be in as you were 5 minutes before.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, that's a vulnerable moment, man, because I'm not somebody who lacks confidence, right? Like, I'm confident that I can go, if I put my mind in anything, I'm confident that I'm going to work as hard or harder than anybody else, and I'm going to achieve as good or better results than anybody else as a result of how I approach things intellectual from a hard work standpoint. The results just end up, they're there, man. Behavior breeds the results, and I have the behaviors. It was more the fact that I wasn't 100% confident to the point that I didn't want to leave my family in a vulnerable position. And so you're right. I that's all I needed to hear from her is, look, I got your back. And I will tell you, even to this day, she said, it wasn't even a difficult thing for me to say to you because I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt there's no way you were going to fail. To hear that from somebody else is completely different than you believing it yourself.
And I would venture to say that probably makes you push even harder, because to fail for ourselves, I talk about this, obviously I was blessed to see my parents every single day work together, and that's a unique relationship in its own right. But the thought of my wife, who's supported me in this, and my children seeing that, I believe that the greatest inspiration to any hustle is paving the path for them, and them seeing that at the very least, they're going to see a guy who pushes himself every single day to the best or hardest possible way, because that's all that I know. And I think that that's probably what she saw in you more than anything else was, I know this guy's not going to fail. Forget about the fact that I think he might be good at insurance or he's a good salesman. Like, David doesn't fail. And with that support, it was I think actually impossible that you would fail. So.
Yep. And I'll tell you, man, it's a completely different dynamic when you are your spouse's biggest fan, regardless of which way that flows, because it goes both ways. And I mean, listen, man, I really think it's important your audience understand something. It's not like we're a privileged white family that's living with no stress in our life whatsoever out in the suburbs making a good living. We have completely just glossed over probably one of the reasons why I work the hardest, and that's my youngest son.
Yes, sir. I was going to get there.
When Annie and I got married, she's 7 years younger than I am, and she didn't have kids yet. And I had Grayson and Landon with my first wife. So I'd already been down that road, but it was time for us to start our family together too. And, having a blended family is its own dynamics. But, Ethan was born with very, very significant neurological issues. He has agenesis of the corpus callosum, which means the superconductor that connects the two hemispheres of your brain is not completely formed in his. It's only about a third of the way developed. He has cerebral palsy. He has ADHD. He has periventricular leukomalacia, which is low white brain matter. And that's the scariest of all of them, because that's something that is only produced prenatally. And there are two diagnoses. One, you have progressive white brain disease and it's 100% fatal, or B, it's just going to stay where it is. You just didn't have a bunch produced and it's going to be this way for the rest of your life. And Annie picked up on that early because she works with people. The company she works for is an augmentative communication company. So they manufacture communication devices for people who have the cognitive ability to speak, but they're nonverbal because of ALS, stroke, something along those lines. She knew Ethan had something going on immediately, faster than the pediatrician. And in fact, the pediatrician argued and said he'd grow out of it. And she said, I don't think so. And we went and we found another pediatrician. We lived as all of this other stuff is brewing. This is before Florida Risk. We lived from the time Ethan was 18 months to the time he was 36 months, not knowing if he would live to see 10 years old. Because the only way you can diagnose progressive white brain disease is to take a benchmark MRI, wait 18 months, and take another one. So we were living with this kid that, my goodness, we love him to death. And, on the outside, everything looks relatively normal. And he's still, a baby at that point. So you don't know how it's going to manifest itself and how bad things really are going to get. You just know you're going to be dealing with some stuff, if you're lucky. And we don't feel sorry for ourselves for that. I think that Ethan was born to exactly who he needed to be born to.
100%.
He has the best advocates on the planet. Nobody would be able to fight for him like we can. Because of my resolve and my backbone and my ability to go and get in front of the school board and be very, very direct with them. And Andrea's because she worked with the school system with kids who had special needs. And she knew we needed to spend the money and get his diagnosis at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia because the people in Tampa weren't cutting it. We spent $100,000 plus out of our pocket flying back and forth up there. Medical insurance wouldn't cover it. But we needed the diagnosis, and she knew we needed the diagnosis because that's the only way you're going to get the resources when you get into the educational system. So we're juggling all of this stuff at the same time as we're going through a major career transition, amongst other things. So I want to be clear about that because it's not like we were just fighting one battle. We're fighting battles on all fronts as we're going through this, and we weathered the storm.
And I think that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, had I asked David Carothers before Ethan was born, and before you made that leap and made the bet on yourself, obviously with Andrew's support, if you would get out the other side in such an incredibly amazing way, you probably would have said, I'm not sure, or man, that seems exhausting. But I know I have a lot of energy. I'm just not sure I have enough for that.
Well, I can tell you it's a whole different animal when you have kids, because Caroline was born when I was 40. And I can promise you she had acid reflux issues. So we basically held her 18 hours a day. But I told Andrea, I'm like, I told Andrea, I'm like, this is why people do this in their early to mid 20s. Like I'm done. Like, there is no way we're doing another one at this point. I don't have it in me. I don't have the energy. I can't stay up like this anymore. I can't get up and do the bottles in the middle of the night and change the diapers and everything. I'm turning into an old man, but there's no telling. And, it's also an interesting dynamic because, as we went through the diagnosis and everything, we found out that the reason that happened to Ethan is more than likely because Andrea was sick with a virus and it got passed through the umbilical cord. So imagine being a husband to a spouse who's now probably carrying some level of that around with them. And she has handled that with absolute grace. I mean, obviously it's not her fault she was sick, but still, how
go try to explain that to her. Go try to explain that to her in a moment.
That's how we tend to think about things. And, just watching how she's handled that whole thing, she is just absolutely amazing. I don't say it to be mushy, but it is truly, truly the pleasure of my life to do life with her. Truly.
I think that I can say, after watching you a little bit from the outside and getting to know both of you, that I will 100% verify that you are the best parents for that. And that advocacy is something that I admire. And I also believe, from a hustle perspective, that everything else that led up to that moment, all the trials, all the tribulations, you said it, you learned at a young age how to get up in front of a strange crowd and find your voice because you were traveling from place to place. Well, now how many people can get up in front of a school board and say their piece exactly how they have to say it to get their son the advocacy that he needs? Probably not someone that had it easy, quote unquote, their entire life. So that hustle early on, again, pays dividends, and packing your car up and starting the career and doing all that. I mean, is there any greater hustle than the result that we're seeing right now? And I got news for you. I don't think we're halfway there. I don't think we're halfway there, David. I don't. Knowing you, if there's anyone that I know that's going to be that, that we're going to see that video of the 103-year-old person breaking a Peloton record or something like that.
There you go.
I mean, I don't know the world's ready for it.
Hey, I need to be the 50-year-old guy on the Peloton to make it to the 103. So
me too. I'll do that at 36 and we'll see what happens. But
there you go.
I mean, David, your story is an amazing story of hustle, of grit, of inspiration. And I can't thank you enough for being here, for sharing it, for being so candid, for being the friend that you are and the mentor you are. We have a closing tradition here that the last question I ask all of our guests is their lifetime or current favorite inspirational or motivational quote and what it means to them and how it inspires their hustle. So the floor is yours.
So actually, I will tell you, there are so many out there because I do read a lot. I'm not an audio book guy. I have to have the paper, which is kind of crazy because I really probably should read or listen to audiobooks instead. With my ADHD, I read 3 sentences, forget what I read, and I have to do it like 3 or 4 times. So it takes me a lot longer to get through a book than most people. But for whatever reason, not even with Kindles and things like that, I like paper books. So the people who are out to save the trees probably don't like me as much. But I actually did a recording when I was in West Virginia last week. And I would say that probably one of my favorite and most inspirational passages outside of things from the Bible is the poem, The Road Less Traveled by Robert Frost. And
that has made all the difference.
The quote at the end, I took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference.
That's it. That's the ultimate hustle, to take the road less traveled. It makes a difference in our lives, in the lives of those that we influence, our families, our children, our employees, our employers, and all those around us. David Carothers, thank you so much again for being here. Thank you for being the inspiration that you are. Really, truly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your story.
Absolutely, man. I would do it 10 times out of 10.
I appreciate it. As we end every podcast, remember, do well by doing good. And of course, always keep hustling. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. If you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.